Ciao! Hey, welcome back to Corey Wire Art. I'm Corey, and this is part 4 of my tutorial on how to draw faces. We started with the basics with like a geometric sort of grid pattern to sort of work out our ratios and all that. We've gone into a bit of shading. We've done a little bit of detail work on the eye, and now we're going to look at the nose and possibly the mouth as well. So let's have a quick look at that. And here we go. We're back here again. Oops. Let's try that again. All right. Okay, so we're going to work on the nose right now. So basically, we're just going to take the shading that we've already created, and we're just going to add a little bit of, let's see if I do that, a little bit more contouring and stuff like that. So let's go up to like there, and I'll take my airbrush, and we'll just sort of start giving it a little bit more definition around here. Before I do that, actually, I might smudge these lines out. I like working with the lines that I've already got in there because you can already see the shape of things. You know what I mean? You can sort of go, oh, as rough as the lines are, there tends to be a certain truth to where they sit, or even, like, because they're not completely accurate, between where they sit. You can sort of see where it's supposed to be. So let's just rough in a little bit of detail here. I'm just using the smudge tool right now. And I'm going to smudge it around there like that. I'm going to bring this highlight out there. All right. Okay, so this is kind of messy work, but nostril there, nostril there. Okay, sorry, I'm not doing a lot of talking because I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing here. Okay, so I'm just roughing out the general shape. I'm going to bring that shadow down under the nose a little bit. Get a slightly bigger brush. And often it's okay to bring some of that shadow down early, down here around like the smile lines, if you will, down here. There we go. Starting to take shape. But let's put in some more detail again just so I can see where I'm at. So this line's going to come around here. And here. Now see, the nostrils will come like along. If you draw the bottom of the nose there, nostrils will generally flare off there to the side, depending on the angle. You got to remember that if the face is facing down, you won't see any of this. And I'll just put a little bit of the tip of the nose there, a bit of definition. And let's just color in there a little bit. And you see how these little bits of like nostril come, they just sort of tend to come around here underneath like that. And again, what you want to do is you want to save like your actual darker strokes for just the kind of like the little low lights, like just to really give it some depth in there. Okay, we'll move on. All right, so this particular lady has a very strong bridge to her nose. And you got to remember, in life, you're not going to have these defined lines so much. So it's best to sort of take them, get like a blender, or if you're using pencils or whatever, to sort of put these in maybe in a darker flesh tone as opposed to like a black. And sort of put them in that way, like really smudge this out. And around the tip of the nose here, if the tip of the nose is sort of pointed upwards a little bit, you're always going to get a little bit of shadow under the tip right here. Let's bring that out a little bit. So that's actually starting to look like something. Now, because I've done so much you know, sort of this sort of blending and all that sort of stuff. I've lost a lot of the shadow contrast, which I can add in a little bit later with some detail work and stuff like that. And okay, so let's have a look at some lips here. So you again, everyone's lips are different, but you know, they all seem to follow the same sort of contours and stuff like that. It's just the thickness of the lips and, you know, the darkness and, you know, all that sort of stuff. So again, I've just blended all this out. And, you know, sometimes you have a little bit of a shadow at the end of the mouth line there, which flows into this sort of crease up here if the person has an apparent one. Not everyone does. Most people do, though. Sort of like this crease here. Depending also if they're smiling or what have you as well. I'll just get a bigger blender there and just... follow that shadow down under here. And we're back. So, sorry, as I mentioned before, I use my iPhone as a webcam and I get phone calls. I don't get phone calls all day. Press record, phone calls all day long. I'm sure we're all under the same situation. So, okay, so looking at this now, I'm going to stretch this out a little bit. You know, as I said, I'm still roughing things up, but for the sake of this, you know, I'm just going to quickly go through a few things that you may find important. So I want you to have a look around this sort of area. Let's see if I go like this. I might just actually bring this up a little bit. Oops. This guy, wrong button. So I feel like the nose is probably a little bit too small, so I'm just going to bring that up. And again, this is the beauty of digital. You can sort of make corrections like this that normally you'd have serious problems with if you were using paper and, you know, canvas and all that sort of stuff. Which, I mean, to be fair, is my preferred medium, but you know, there's definite advantages to sort of doing it this way. Workflow particularly, stuff like that. But basically, just take notice of what I'm doing here with highlights and lowlights. So you can see, like under here in the nostril area, you know, obviously it's going to be a little bit darker there, around through there, but there's still a little bit of a highlight on the shadow side of the nose. If you look around here, and you know, all this side of the nose here is sort of blown out with light, and this side's darker, and it all seems really complicated, but it's one of those things that sort of happens as you do it. You don't really have to think about all this stuff. You just sort of, if you do the shading techniques, like I said, you'll just end up having it there already, and you'll look at it and go, oh, okay, look, the shadow is sort of sitting right there, and it's not, you know, so great there, and blah blah blah. So let's just continue working on these lips. So obviously the darkest part of the lip's going to be the line through here, and probably underneath here you could sort of flesh that in a little bit. And I mean, you know, then you've got, you know, whatever technique you're using, you can find some way of sort of adding those sort of, again, those sort of striations across there. I would usually use like a dark tone and then juxtapose that against like a highlight right in between all those lines to sort of give it that sort of texture that you'd expect to find on lips. You know, and then often it doesn't hurt if you're into that sort of thing to sort of blot it out a little bit and blend it. And then again, you can come through, depending on the glossiness of it, you can add like a little bit of a specular highlight across there, just to add like a gloss texture to it. Another thing that I always find sort of brings the lips out a little bit is if you take like almost like your highlight skin tone and just sort of trace a line along here. And sorry, I'm working with a tablet, so it's a little bit tricky, but to get the detail right, you know, just bring that along there. Now that's exaggerated. I'd normally sort of make the line sort of thicker and probably duller, and a lighter skin tone, like a, you know, like one of these sort of mid-range tones through there to contrast against the dark of the shadow and the top lip. But you know, that's just to give you more of an impression. But you know, if I smudge that out, you might see a bit more what I'm talking about. You know, it just, there always tends to be a little bit of a bevel around the top lip in most cases. particularly sort of around between this little groove here and the top lip. You know, and see that's sort of getting somewhere. Yeah, a little bit of detail there, a few dark lines. And, you know, we're getting somewhere. Now, obviously, I could sit here and polish that all day, but it gives you an idea. Like the things to take away from this lesson are, you know, using the shadows that you've already installed there, or at least the shadow map, like where you're going, figure out where the shadows are going. If you're using a less forgiving medium, you'd probably in the sketch phase draw out, you know, these sort of contours, like, you know that your shadow is going to fall approximately there from this light direction. And in here is going to be darker. So you can sort of map these out in your original sketch and sort of know where you're going to use darker colors. You know, like, I mean, with digital and things like, you know, to a certain extent, airbrushing, depending on what you use, oil paints, all that sort of stuff, you can layer things and you can blend and you can come up with things after the fact. But some mediums, like if you're using, say, colored pencils and stuff, there's not really a lot of, you know, a lot of flexibility once you start. So, you know, these sort of little areas here that are going to have shadow, this little groove here, all along the bottom under here, you sort of get an idea of your shadow contours. You know, across this area is going to be darker. You know, and so that's really what to take away from that. And I mean, just a few of these sort of key things about, like, you know, how the nostril sort of flares around that little nostril divot there. This little groove, like light groove around here, around the top of the lip. Little specular highlights that add realism, you know, all that sort of stuff. And again, I mean, this isn't the most perfect portrait in the world, but you're sort of, you know, I mean, I would spend a lot more time on this normally. But for, you know, essentially for the tutorial, the ideas I wanted to get across, this pretty much sums it up, you know. Yeah, so anyway, that's basically it from me. Yeah, so remember to subscribe and check back in. If you want to send me any of your pictures, see how you're traveling and stuff like that, or if you've got any questions, Corey Wire Art, CoreyWyer art @gmail.com. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.